Right. So I want to speak about the Mike Israel situation and just give you my thoughts. Now, this video will be more of a conversational piece than my usual videos. So feel free to pause the video at any point, drop your comment about what you're thinking about what I've said. If you agree, disagree, I'm happy to hear it, and I would want to encourage some discussion about this because I held off on making a video because I want to know a bit more about the facts. I wanted to have some time to process. So, of course, I saw the original video from Solomon Nelson. Much respect to Solomon for having the rigor to put that out. That's not easy. And then also I saw I guess you could call it a rebuttal from Milo Wolf and Mike himself. So I thought, since we've had a couple of back and forths, it'd be a good idea to jump in and just give you my opinion, because I think I offer an individual, unique perspective regarding the education angle. So hopefully you guys will find some of that useful in terms of what I'm about to say, because I think, I just think I can provide you with a perspective which perhaps hasn't been discussed. I've certainly not heard it. So I'm going to start with just talking through a bit about the doctoral process, and a bit about my education. And this will all relate to what's going on here. And I'm going to try and be as neutral as possible. I don't think it's, well, I'll start by saying this. I think it's important not to take sides, because that's not what science is about. So I've been fairly critical of some parts of the evidence-based research in the past. Now, when I then quote science, a lot of people get up in arms about that and start to say, well, 1 minute you're anti-science, 1 minute you're pro-science. And I think it's very important to understand, if you are truly science-based, it's actually a lot of work. You can't just be all science or all not science. You have to be selective and actually look at the evidence on a case-by-case basis. So I want to provide a balanced take on Mike. I don't want to just jump in and go, well, let's just lay into him now because everyone else is. So talking about my education, I have a number of degrees. So I have an undergrad degree, which was in computer science. After that, I did a teaching degree, which is a PGC, which was in IT, or what was then IT, now is computer science. Now, at a certain point, I decided to do a master's as well. This was roughly 2009-ish. All these were with good universities, by the way. So my undergrad was with the University of Liverpool, very well-respected university. The teaching degree was with the University of Brighton. It's a good university. It's not anything special, but it's good in that area. And the master's was done with the University of Nottingham, which is a very good university. And the master's was in education and IT. Leadership. Yeah, leadership and IT. Leadership in education and IT. And that was great. I mean, it was a very good year. However, it was definitely a step up from my undergrad degree, which is in computer science. At the time, I thought that was very complicated. And I wanted to go through this process because I think for some of the people who are listening and commenting, they might not understand the degree of complexity that is involved as you go further and further up the fields. Now, in roughly 2011, I actually started on a doctoral project, 4-year doctoral program, and I completed year one. I didn't complete all 4 years because it was just stretching me too far. I got a really good job after I completed the master's in leadership and ICT in one of the top 15 schools in the entire country. I was on the management team there. I was also part of the leadership team. But it was a very, very busy job, a lot of commitments, more than just a regular teacher's schedule. There was a lot of other commitments going on. So I completed 1 year of that doctoral program, which was called an EDD, Educational Doctorate. Now, one thing I will say is, to even be accepted onto the EDD, you have to present, at least this was the case for me in the UK. I don't know if the standards are different in America. I doubt it, though. You have to present something which is original and can contribute to the field. The Masters, it wasn't like that. The Masters, we were all working together in a group. There's about 15 of us all together from different countries. One guy from Yemen, another lady from Saudi Arabia, a few Brits, a couple of girls there from China. So we were all in that together, and we even worked together as well. And we were doing basically projects which were set by the master's course in director, our tutor. So we were all working on what were the same projects, basically, giving our interpretations of what was going on. Now, the difference between that and work at the doctoral level is it has to be original. So my project, it had to add something to the field. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been accepted. There's a big deal about this. If you're not adding something to the field, you're not going to be accepted to be on a doctoral program at all. It has to be seen to have value. It has to be seen to be worthwhile. So that's the first trick. Now, the second thing is I completed a year of that. Now, within that year, I performed 2 pieces of research and I handed in 3 dissertation type of reviews, basically essays, bits of work, which I was marked on so that I could then progress to the next year. Because if you don't pass to a sufficient level, you can't progress to the next year. Now, that's a lot of work, and it has to be quite rigorous. So by the end of that year, I was already intimately familiar with the stats, the numbers, because that's all that's in your head that year. A lot of my work was qualitative research. So I was interviewing people. I conducted 2 rounds of research, one near the middle of the year, one near the end of the year, which I then wrote up into those 2 projects. And the first essay was at the beginning of the year. So 1, 2, 3. First one was just an introductory thing. And the second and third one were with the research. But anyway, what I'm saying is, by the end of that first year, I was intimately familiar with the numbers, the stats, and the direction of what the data was trying to tell us. I mean, there was no conclusions after 1 year, but there was starting to be some trends, basically. Now, where I struggle, and I'm not condemning anyone, I'm saying I'm just struggling with this, and hopefully you guys can understand where I'm coming from. Where I struggle is when I looked at the data table on Mike's, what he now says is a draft, it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense that he would hand that in even as a first draft, because the data is what everything's about. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's what everything is about. You conduct the research, you have a hypothesis, you have an idea, you conduct research to test that idea. You're not supposed to have a notion either way. You're just supposed to have an idea you want to test, right? You're not supposed to think this is going to go this way or this way. You're supposed to just be neutral. But the point is, you have an idea. You're trying to test it. So you test it. And then the data is extremely important to that, because that's your entire thing is the data. So when I saw that table, it didn't make any sense to me. It didn't make any sense that he would even hand that in as a first draft. Like, why would you hand that in? Why would you just fabricate the data? It was all wrong, and none of it was checked. We had this thing that some of the participants were way too young, some were way too it was just a mess, and some of the fields were just blatantly copied from column to column. That's not in my experience. Again, I'm not calling anyone out. I'm trying to be neutral. In my experience, I went through painstaking effort to get that data for my doctoral work. And it all tied into what were starting to be growing trends, and not conclusions at that stage, but certainly trends which supported the line of thinking. It was all about the data. It wouldn't have even crossed my mind to have handed in fake numbers at that point. It doesn't make sense at that level. So that was my first issue, like the level of rigor that was put into even a draft. If we're accepting that it's a draft, we're so far below the doctoral level. Somebody at that level wouldn't have done that. And then, of course, it got accepted and it got passed and it was uploaded as a final draft. I mean, yes, you could consider that to be a failing from the Institute. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying now. A lot of pro-Mike supporters are saying that it's a failing of the Institute, which I get that. Obviously, there is a lot of emphasis on the Institute, and perhaps things are different now. But then, Mike did his doctoral work the same time as I was starting mine. So more than likely, the pressure on the day, whether it was directed more at the student or more at the teacher, was probably about the same. So yeah, there was pressure on my tutor to make sure my data was right. But at the same time, there was a heck of a lot of pressure on me, Because if I didn't pass each piece of work, I wouldn't go on to the next year and the next year. And I'm saying you have to be so rigorous, even from the beginning, for us to think that at 3 years into, however long his PhD took, if it was 3 years or 4 years, 3 or 4 years into it, if he's still just putting in random numbers which mean nothing, like that, do you guys get what I'm saying? That doesn't compute in my mind as being genuine. And again, I want to just make it clear, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible. I'm just saying from my experience, having had the experience I've had and the education I've had, it wouldn't even cross my mind at that stage, 3 or 4 years into it, having done all that research, looked at all those numbers, to just, I don't know, randomly make stuff up. The spelling, I will say this, the spelling errors I don't care about. I'm not fussed about spelling errors. It's not a big thing for me. Okay, so for all the pro Mike guys who are saying spelling errors don't matter, I kind of agree. I don't really care about that. Yes, it's doctoral work. It's a lot of work, though. What I was really just stumped about was the lack of care and the lack of attention to the data, the numbers, because that's everything. That's everything you're trying to do is via the data, because the data is the result of the testing you've done to test your hypothesis, to test the whole thing, what it's all about. So that's kind of my first, I guess you could say that's maybe a skeptical point of view, but that's my first point. I'm struggling to wrap my head around how that happened. If we're thinking it's a genuine thing, if we give him the benefit of the doubt, I am just struggling so much to understand how he would put that in, even in a draft. You wouldn't even draft that. I wouldn't have drafted that and handed it in. I wouldn't have. Because what am I handing in? What is my tutor going to think of that? She was a lovely lady. She's not going to make any sense of it. It means nothing. What if I handed that in? What was she going to mark? Remember, it's a doctoral thesis. You're not talking GCSE age, teenage work here where, oh, check my essay outline, please, miss. We're past that. We're several leagues beyond that. So if that was a draft, what was being checked? What was being marked? Again, like, just feel free to pause the video and give me your thoughts on it. That's what I'm struggling with. You're so far beyond the basic teenage level of, hey, check my sentence structure. It has to mean something. Your doctoral researcher would have had to check something. And there's nothing there to check. The data was all wrong. And if the data's all wrong, what are we even doing? So that was my first issue. Next thing, let's move on to, because I had a few points here that I want to talk through. Now, the second thing I want to say is there's clearly an interest in this topic. There's clearly an interest in Mike and his work. Okay, because I've seen some very almost irrationally pro Mike people in the industry saying, who cares? You know, who cares? What's the problem? Yeah, it does matter. People are clearly interested. Now, we could debate and we could discuss why are people so interested in Mike's downfall, as it were. Again, if we're trying to put a good face on things, if we're trying to be neutral, I think, first of all, there is always a point, like a peaking point, where people's popularity peaks and then it either comes crashing down or they have to change and adapt. We saw that with Greg Doucette. You know, his popularity peaked. He started to get quite a lot of detractors and he almost reinvented himself and carried on. We saw that with More Plates, More Dates. Now, for him, his reinvention has meant he's pretty much come off YouTube and he's gone on to do other things. So he sort of pivoted in a different area. But you will see that. You'll see the height of popularity and then you'll start to see detractors, because the basic human instinct is people love to see an underdog succeed. And then when he's a success, they love to see him fail. So I think part of, if we're being positive about this, part of the popularity of Solomon's video is that it probably came at just the right time for when we're starting to see a tipping point in Mike's popularity because of, well, quite frankly, because of some of the stuff that he's been saying. And also, I would say it's been long enough that people are starting to see that his recommendations, they're not as infallible as they may have thought. You know, for example, um, higher volumes, taking things close to failure, ending a block with the highest volumes and training to failure. It makes no sense within the context of volume, frequency, and intensity kind of trio. It's a recipe for injury, assuming you're anything but a beginner and very weak. So there are lots of recommendations that he said which are starting to just sound a bit crazy, like the whole sleep is more powerful than anabolics. If you do your first cycle, you should do anabol or whatever he said. And the other claims of just the casual claims about being so angry, which is insane. I mean, I think Mike's about my age. No, younger. He's younger than me. To be that angry at that point, that's got to be hell on a regular basis. Talking about how he wants to just get in people's faces and make them uncomfortable and all that kind of stuff and get really kind of aggressive with people. And talking about how he's bigger and stronger than Mike Mensa and all this kind of stuff. Like, I think a lot of that came together on the back of 2024, which was a particularly bad year for evidence-based, the current crop of evidence-based communicators. And that came on top of then of Mike having these moments where he's kind of having a bit of a wobble. And I think Solomon's video was just perfectly timed. I mean, I don't think Solomon timed it on purpose, but I think his video had excellent timing, and it was just a combination of a perfect storm. Hence why he's over 1 million subs now. Sorry, over 1 million views in a channel which has something like 30k subs. So, you know, crazy popular. So clearly there's an interest. So for people saying, what's the point in all this? Why are we that bothered? People are clearly bothered. For right or for wrong reasons, they are concerned. So I don't really take that as a valid dismissal. And I think one thing I will say on this point is that for larger accounts, any kind of bad information is a lot more multiplicative than with smaller accounts. You know, if I say something which people think is a bit wrong or whatever, not that I think I do, I think I'm generally quite genuine because most of my recommendations come from actual coaching clients. But, you know, if I say something which is a bit off, it doesn't have the same negative spread as if Mike does. Mike's got multi-millions of followers at this point. So when he starts talking about how you should do more volume than IFBB Pro, that can have a reach. And I know what you guys are thinking. You guys are thinking, well, people will just dismiss that as Mike being Mike. A lot of people don't, though. You know, I covered recently a guy on Reddit who was doing something like 45 sets for his side delts. A young guy, shoulders were in bits, and he was making no progress. I mean, it was crazy. So there are impressionable people out there, quite a lot of them, who will take what he says at face value. And why wouldn't you? Because isn't that what he is? He is, as in his own words, you know, a doctor of exercise science. You should trust him. You should trust him over your bros. That's what he's there for, to give you advice. He's not just there for comedy. So the point that I'm making here is that bad information from larger accounts is multiplicative, and it doesn't even have to be bad. It can just be unnuanced. You know, if you're speaking to such a broad audience, it can just be unnuanced. And eventually, at some point, when people get annoyed by the sheer amount of the bad information that's coming out without the retractions, without the clarifications, people will start to get annoyed because you're wasting their time, you know. Now, next point, I want to speak about going back to the doctorate. Who cares if it wasn't rigorous? Who cares? Because, you know, again, speaking positively, who cares? Because his information now is good. Whether you agree with that or not, I'm trying to, you know, present a devil's advocate. I think there probably is a problem. I think the problem is probably quite similar to maybe being a fake natty. You know, if a large portion of what you present to people as the initial impression is based on something false, and in this case, certainly from what I've seen, whether you're talking draft or whatever else, and at least, from the first video, the problem might occur with them saying, well, is this the same issue as a fake natty, presenting what is something other than reality to convince you of their authority? I think that's a problem, you know. But then, of course, with that, it may be the case that the first draft was just the first draft and the final draft was, better, which I still don't think the final draft was fantastic. Because again, like I said in the section when I discussed what goes into doctoral work, I just don't understand how that was passed. Again, not talking about the spelling errors. I don't care about the spelling errors. Yeah, I really don't. More about the actual case study. What was he trying to prove? Didn't seem to add much. And that is important. For all you saying, that might not be important, I think maybe you don't understand that is important. It is. You have to add something original. The entire difference between a doctoral piece of work and a master's piece of work is that the doctoral piece of work is original. It has to stand on its own 2 feet. It has to build upon the existing body of work, which I'm struggling to see how his does. And then all the rest of the stuff about the draft. So even if we were to assume what Solomon critiqued was the draft, and I'm willing to believe that. I'm not saying anything either way, but I'm just saying it doesn't seem like the doctoral work itself was that rigorous. That may be an issue, because if your qualifications are based on you being an authority in exercise science, a doctor in exercise science, and that's what a lot of your authority rests on, and you flaunt that a lot, because he does say that a lot. He said it himself, wow, that carries a lot of weight. That can be a problem, because a lot of times it's like a guy who's, basically like a fake nanny. So, okay. So I've covered quite a lot of that. I'm going to just talk a bit about collateral damage now. And what does this say about the field of exercise science as a whole? Because I think, I know for a fact, exercise science, particularly within the crowd that we see on Instagram, the ones who really put themselves out there and advertise themselves and their services and their seminars and their ebooks and their apps, all those guys who are very interested in being influencers and not just researchers, I think they've come under a lot of fire. I think 2024 is a particularly bad year for them. So I think it does have additional collateral damage to the rest of the exercise science field. And I don't think it's unfair to say that so far, the ones who have been involved with Mike on a professional level have flocked to his defense, almost without exception. And everyone else has been critical, almost without exception. And I think that says something in itself. I think that's quite powerful. The people who have worked with him and have benefited from a relationship with him, whether that's in terms of exposure, clout, whatever, they are defending him. Ones who are essentially in the industry, who make a living out of the industry and have worked with him and have benefited from that relationship, they are the ones who are defending him immediately and dismissing Solomon's claims. I think that's, and then on top of that, most of the people who are being negative about this generally don't have much to do with him directly, or did have in the case of Greg and Johnny, and now don't. And they're the ones who are being more critical about this. This in itself, I think that's quite a powerful macro signal as to what's going on. I think there's a degree of favoritism, because on a macro level, the ones who have benefited from working with him and his relationship are the ones who are immediately coming to defend him. And they all have their points. They all have their own individual points, dismissing Solomon's work or saying this or that or whatever. But on a macro level, the ones who have benefited from that relationship have flocked to his defense. Everyone else, for the most part, has been critical, and I would argue probably rightfully so. I would say this points to favoritism within that circle, and that's the problem. I don't know. I mean, again, pause the video. Let me know what you think about that. I think that's quite an important point. I'm trying to be neutral here. I'm trying my bloody hardest to be neutral. It's hard. Giggity. Haven't done that for a while. OGs will remember. So, next thing I want to speak about is the bigger question of, does exercise science actually add anything? Honestly, I'm torn with this. What does it add? And I'm willing to be open-minded about this as well. What has it added that we didn't know before? What has been the original outcome? I'm fairly open-minded on this one because I don't want to condemn an entire field, because I don't think that's fair. And I think that can be a bit irrational. And again, that's not how you conduct science. Like I said at the beginning, I am pro some things and I'm against other things, but I think it's a question. Does it add anything? And then the next question is it a net positive? My opinion is that, and I'd like to hear your answers, in the comments. My opinion is that it can be abused quite easily. As we're seeing, it can be abused. Now, the next thing leads me into the consumer's role. So, if we remember, there was I think it was testosterone, something like that. People were selling testosterone anyway. And there were some studies talking about how great it was, blah, blah, blah. And then there were some other studies coming out a while later saying that it was a total scam. There is a consumer role here. The consumer's role, there is a responsibility for you guys to be skeptical. Now, so part of this mess is down to you as well. And I'm going to just end with this point because this is more of a point of human nature. This is not a point of Mike and this situation. Just taking it from me as an older guy. And our entire civilization is built upon this fact and this artifact of human nature. And that is, most people, particularly when they're younger, want to be told what to do, what to think. They're not interested in thinking for themselves. They want a direction, they want a leader. This is how everything works in life, in human society. You have some dude who props himself up as the big man and people flock to listen to him. It's the basis of everything. That is human nature. Until you get to a point where you've lived long enough, you have enough experience in life to understand that that's all BS, and then you break free from that. Some people never break free. But this is how wars are fought. This is how everything is done. In the world today, we're always looking for somebody to do the thinking for us. We want the authority to tell us convincingly, this is it. And that's on all of us. That's on all of us. We should all be more critical. We should all be thinking for ourselves a lot more. But it doesn't happen. And then, once people have made their mind up, knowing full well they have not done the rigor that they should have done, they stick to that belief like glue. Because admitting anything else would admit a failure on their part, that they didn't do their due diligence, that they just believed something without verifying it. That is on them. We all need to be a lot more critical of what we believe and who we prop up as authorities. And if they're unchecked, that's a problem. And again, I'll go back to the point about favoritism. There are so many people who are not affiliated with Mike in any way, just fans, who have just dismissed this outright. And I don't think that's right. Again, I'm not condemning him, but I don't think it's right to just dismiss it outright, because this is a problem. And they're doing that because they have already committed to Mike as their authority on this. To admit anything else at this point is to admit their own failures. Is to admit that they were just sheep blindly following a leader, which we all do to a certain extent. We all love to think we're independent thinkers. That's what this society is built on. The society is built on this notion that we all think we're independent thinkers. We all think we are free thinkers. But all we're really looking for is just someone to tell us what to think. And I know this as much as anyone because I have dared to speak up against some of the evidence-based communicators in the industry. The amount of irrational backlash I've received. How dare you speak up against our favorite influencer? Not in those words, but that's basically what they're saying. And none of them ever actually none of them ever actually know the argument. It's always just, well, he said this. What do you think about this? Well, this. What do you think about this now? And it goes nowhere. Because the masses are not interested in knowing things themselves. They want to outsource their thinking, and then they have to be loyal to their decision. Otherwise, it betrays the fact that they didn't think, and it betrays their ignorance, and it betrays their sheep-like mentality. So some of this is on you, the viewer. Because a deficit in human nature, I mean, a deficit and an advantage, because that's how we get things done. It's how society works. If we didn't have that, everyone would be a lone wolf. But a deficit in human nature is our need to follow authorities. Authorities which are familiar and comfortable. Mike is familiar and comfortable. He's self-deprecating. He's funny. He's familiar. He's been around for a while. He's comfortable. So, I mean, this is probably I should have made this point at the beginning of the video or mid video, but the classic thing with him and Lyle, the classic sentiment back then was Lyle's right, but we like Mike. So we'll go with Mike. It was never any more evident than that interaction there. Lyle is not likable or familiar, and no disrespect to Lyle, I don't think he wants to be. But that's why he's not as popular as Mike, because he doesn't have that familiarity. He's a bit more erratic. Doesn't matter if he's right. So it's the part of the problem, I'll end with saying this, of whatever's going on with the situation, whether it's first draft or whatever, part of the issue with this all being passed is down to you, the consumer. Because it's a flaw of human nature not to be more critical of our source of information, to just blindly follow a leader and then defend that faith. Because admitting anything to the contrary is admitting that we are just sheep. Right, with that rather glum ending, thank you for making it this far. If you have a great weekend.